Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the recap of my newest Strix D&D session. A lot but very little happened here, and I will admit, the second I sat down to play, my brain and eyes decided you will not see or work properly today, so you will not be taking notes. Good luck remembering everything that happened. On top of that, I'm now using my onboard microphone to record this, so the sound quality may vary, and not in a good way. And here we go! When we left off, the party had just finished 2 separate battles at 2 different taverns. At both, creatures and or constructs had entered and begun indiscriminately murdering patrons, as well as trying to take down the buildings. In the second tavern, it had been brought to their attention that one of the enemies, either working alone and coincidentally being there, or working with whatever was causing the chaos, had been Kira's sister, Azula. After the battle, they had been deputized for detective work by the owner of the tavern, a very large red devil man who had given them full restoration potions. As the party exited the tavern in the beginning of this session, they debated over whether they should chase down the dangerous Mage Slayer creature and whatever person Gowan had noticed following its retreat, head off in the direction of the main hub security building to make certain assistance was going out to the campus, or follow the trail of Azula. Opani is of the opinion that they need to chase down Azula, as she already regrets not letting Jiri follow her initially. Azula is the only truly identifiable enemy they can name, and just taking her out could not only erase what might be a smaller part of a larger threat, but would also be protection for her newfound friend, Kita. Kita, on the other hand, is very nervous about chasing down her sister, but also, Opani notes that more of them couldn't possibly take down the Mage Slayer if they came upon it. Something is wrong with how the creature was behaving to begin with, since the Mage Slayers are there on campus to put an end to any dangerous rogue activity on the campus itself. Since Opani flat out murdered someone a few nights back and nothing happened to her, she's recognized that one of these creatures probably should have sensed what she did and come after her for it. Instead, it had attacked a tavern where nothing out of sorts was happening until the party had started to fight off the people attacking it. So she doesn't want to take the risk of going after that badass thing that simply attacks the magic casters, who only really have magic to attack with. The group finally stops waffling around and heads off in the direction Jiri says Azula went. As Keithar and some of the others know, there is another very large tavern area in that direction that also might be under threat now. 2 taverns have been attacked already, and God knows how many taverns could be under attack as they speak. They know it's a small tavern at the end of a football-sized field, and that said field is surrounded by enormous arena-like walls, and these enemies have liked taking down walls, so that seems like a pretty big target to Keithar. Just more people to be killed and more walls to be taken down, if the theory is correct. And indeed, as they rush off in that direction, they hear the sounds of explosions in the air. On their run, Keithar instructs Jiri to disguise herself as a little brown kobold so that the party can identify her in the upcoming confrontation, but she won't necessarily be recognized by anyone who might have been in one of the last 2 taverns. This will keep her under maybe potentially a little bit of protection. They enter at the far end of the large walled-in field to see that the walls indeed are under attack from all different locations, and at the far end, people are trying to escape the tavern itself and the nearby walls. Everyone rushes toward the tavern, although there are enemies closer to them attacking different portions of the wall surrounding them. They get close enough for Kita to recognize Azula standing by 2 men in college robes, and she calls her sister out to fight her, launching into immediate initiative with an eldritch blast. This is swiftly followed up by Opani and Jiri, who take her lead by firing guiding bolt and arrows respectively at the responding sister. Kethar and Gawain go into battle with the creatures that leave the walls behind, the enemies closer to them, to confront them. And Gawain begins by going off in the opposite direction from Kethar. Celeste just kind of muddles straight down the middle or to the right or left as is needed as more people leave the walls to confront what is threatening them. As they make their way closer to the tavern, which is fully in flames by this point, Kethar realizes with dread that he recognizes the largest group of enemies by the building. He doesn't know their names or necessarily all their faces, but they are all wearing Lore Hall robes, the campus college that he is a student of. Also, the two men that Azila had been standing near before she went out to meet her sister were professors of Lore Hall. Not teachers Kethar himself knew personally, but simply recognized by having passed them or seen pictures of them on the campus. Dread fills him just knowing that he and his sister live close to the source of all the trouble they've encountered that evening, after everything he took her away from to begin with. During the battle, Apani realizes that the two men Kethar recognized as professors, as well as some of the students, are using arcane means to try and take down the large wall behind the tavern. In her mind, it stands to reason that the two leaders might be using more damaging spells, so she attempts a silence spell on one of the men to cut down on the damage being done to the wall, but this attempt fails as the professor turns and counterspells her. Kita, for her part, begins to use a new skill called Tentacle of the Deep, which comes up and begins doing some damage to Azula. It also grabs her multiple times, which mechanically in the game tends to slow her down and keep her from being able to do quite as much damage due to lack of movement or from rolling with disadvantage. Gawain, having finished off a few of the more muscular enemies near their end of the field, hones in on Azula and confronts her by compelling duel for a single round. It is instantly apparent when Azula sees him and is compelled to duel him that the two somehow recognize each other and have some sort of a history. Whether it's personal or not isn't entirely clear, but it is implied. For that single round, this duel keeps Kita from being attacked by her sister. This has left Celeste and Kethar to deal with any remaining nearby enemies the best that they can, and it isn't particularly difficult, just time-consuming. They silently fight the best they can, while Kethar constantly has one eye or ear on his sister's location at all times. Still trying to attack the professors, Opani has been slinging her necromancy spells about to do the most possible damage. In spite of often failing or missing, yet when she casts one of these spells, that insidious voice returns to her mind. It tells her that she's targeting the wrong being. Determined to ignore the voice, it's just far too much to deal with along with everything else happening around her right now, she tries to continue fighting, but her thought process is stopped dead for a moment when the voice logistically asks her a question. Would you prefer I stop talking to you? And although she doesn't hear the voice after that through the rest of the battle, she is keenly aware that the presence of the voice remains in the background. This tells her, rightly or wrongly, that she's not losing her mind. This voice is coming from someplace outside of herself, or at least separate from herself. And she doesn't know what to make of that. She just doesn't have the mental capacity to deal with that in the moment, and she struggles to fight on. Eventually, the enemies realize that the defenders of the arena are making ground, and that they are slowly losing. Azula, badly damaged by her fight with Kita and Gawain, retreat to the professors, and all of them take off together, closely followed by many of the Lore Hall robed students. Jiri has made it entirely across the field by this time, along with much of the party, and is in the way of an exit when two of the aggressors try to flee in that direction. She uses Daunting Roar to try and keep them in place, but it doesn't quite work. Both students, freaked out by the tiny kobold that just roared at them, lash out and land hits on the small disguised cub. As the fight starts to die down and many enemies are in flight, the cavalry arrives in the form of more than 10 security guards rushing to the party's aid. They all recognize Kethar and Celeste, and some of them already know Gowan. So Kethar points out his allies, simply yelling the word friend for each. This includes his sister, who is still in sight during this exact second, as it happens just before her daunting roar and movement. He tells the guard to fuck up everybody else, pointing at the professor specifically and Azula beside them as they flee. Unfortunately, the three bigwig enemies make it out of the arena to freedom. But between the rest of the party, several of the students are taken into custody or killed because they continued to fight. Kethar, having just seen his sister attacked and wounded by two much larger men, roars with rage and goes after them as his sister retreats into the door leading outside, presumably to protect herself or try to follow the trail of the three obvious leaders of the attack. Kethar heads directly for the men who hurt his sister, even though they have just been grabbed into custody by that point, and slashes out at one of in rage with his claws. This unintentionally fully kills his opponent, and his rage immediately drops down to somewhat manageable levels as he intimidates the leftover enemy into cooperating with the guards. Kida and Gowan merge together on a group of enemies, now recognizing what Kethar didn't. Not all of their opponents were Lore Hall students or staff. Some of them are very clearly from the same race and location as Kida, Gowan, and Azula, working under the enemy sisters' orders. Although intimidated and being docile, none of these enemies cooperate well with the interrogation that starts, and the NPC guards assure Gowan it will be taken care of. The slow calming of the chaos is interrupted somewhat when Jiri returns to the field, now in her Leonin form and clutching her side. Kethar has just enough time to see her stumbling in when she collapses unconscious to the ground, and he rushes over to scoop her tiny body up into his arms. Gowan and Nopani also see this and rush towards their two Leonin friends to give aid. They pump healing spells into Jiri, but she doesn't waken. It is clear that the cub is physically healed. She's still breathing, she still has a heartbeat, but something else is wrong. Gowan attempts to identify and heal what could be causing her continued unconscious state, but nothing he or Opani have at their disposal helps. This is not a poison, this is not a disease, it seems to be a magical effect, but nobody knows what or how to solve it. At this stage, Kethar is falling completely apart. His entire body is vibrating with agitation and distress. His friends and comrades all try to soothe him, but he initially will not loosen his grip on his sister. He will barely even speak to them. But when the security sergeant on scene tells him they need to get her to a high cleric immediately, and they will escort the group there for safety, he initially shuts down the idea. The place they want to go is in Lore Hall, and Lore Hall is where the professors and students were from. Although it's clear by now that attacks are happening all over the campus, presumably in all of the colleges, Lore Hall, in his mind, must be the most dangerous place to go. The sergeant insists it is their best chance, and Kethar reluctantly agrees that he'll go there. For his sister. Celeste offers to carry Jiri, but Kethar reminds her that she's made of fire, and Jiri is made partially of fur, and that could be a very bad idea if something goes wrong. He then hands the child over to Kida, still shaking badly, and pulls out his warhammer as the remaining group of guards and friends fall into a protective rank around them, and they walk out of the tavern park walls. And that is all that happened. It was actually quite a bit in a very small amount of time, although it took all day to have this little battle. There was just a lot of moving elements. And for somebody who didn't take notes, that sucked. But it was a really fun thing, and we finally found like the plot thread to solidly follow. And I've got all sorts of motivations for my characters. my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law don't talk to me too much about their own characters' motivations, although we will talk about their thoughts in a moment at the end of a session. But I'm not going to share that unless they ask me to, because I have weeks to think about where my character is between sessions. In this case, it was something like 4 months because we had to reschedule 5 separate times due to work and illness. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. Opani and Keith are both in extremely distressed places. Kita's very distressed, and Gawano seems pumped. I don't know where Celeste is. My sister-in-law is still working on all of this, and she's just such a quiet person to begin with. She likes to be quiet and kind of don't interject too much. She's very shy. I love you, Dawn. And so slowly we'll build up her confidence and she'll get more in there. And when she does something with her character that needs to be talked about, other than she went smashy smashy and succeeded very well at it, we will let you know. Have a great day, guys.